in depth tonight, President Trump wrapping up his first day back in office with a fury of executive orders. They range from everything, including immigration, TikTok, and January 6th pardons. Now, the president signed his first orders inside the Capitol this afternoon. Then he signed more in front of his large crowd of supporters inside Capital One Arena. And then he signed dozens more back at the White House in the Oval Office. And for much more on President Trump's actions here on day one of this new administration, we are now joined by Dr. James Wallner of Clemson University. Dr. Wallner, thank you so much as always for your time. President Trump making a lot of promises here on day one, getting right to work just minutes after being sworn in. Some of these executive orders, it's one thing that when you examine this legislation and you examine some of these orders, what is the difference when you look at what President Trump is able to do in these executive orders compared to legislation working through Congress?
Well, when the president acts to issue an executive order, the president is acting because the Constitution said the president can act in the case of the pardon power, or because Congress has given the president power to act in that way. And then the president may act by issuing an executive order. But when the president does so, the president is going to interpret and infer and reflect on what Congress has given the president, and then make a determination for himself as to what he can do. And so there's going to be a disconnect there at times. And if there is a disconnect, then there are avenues for people to challenge those executive orders after the fact.
When we look at some of these executive orders, we saw President Trump say there from his inaugural speech saying that he has declared a national emergency at the southern border. Immigration, a huge issue this election cycle. That national emergency, what does that mechanism for President Trump by declaring that national emergency? What does it allow him to do?
Well, it allows him to do a couple of things. And I think the first thing is, from a political perspective, it helps to signal seriousness and intent of purpose, right? It helps to say, I'm serious. I wasn't lying. I told you on the campaign trail that I would get a handle on this, and I intend to do it, and that's why I'm doing this on day one. And that's a very important thing. The other thing declaring a national emergency will allow you to do is it gives you maybe access to federal funding. You may not necessarily have recourse to it. It may kind of get you around certain regulatory burdens that may be imposed. And potentially, if there is any question as to the president's authority to deploy troops to the southern border, to police the border, there is an argument that declaring a national emergency may be one of the things that you can do to help fall within the exceptions that Congress has granted for that kind of activity.
You mentioned the pardon power of the president. A lot of talk about pardons today. We saw in the waning minutes of the Biden administration, President Biden, now former President Biden, he pardoned Liz Cheney, former general, Dr. Fauci, as well as the committee members there for the January 6th Oversight Committee. Now we have President Trump talking about some pardons for what he called January 6th hostages. Where does that almost differentiate between these two actions? Because we also saw President Biden issue pardons, preemptive pardons, to his family.
Right. There's two ways I think that this is very interesting to me. One is that it's former President Biden almost conceding that what President Trump has been saying about the Justice Department is true. Biden has said no, that this is the rule of law in America, that stuff can't happen. And now he's saying, we're just going to issue blanket pardons because it probably can. Now, granted, he's saying that because now Trump is president, but still it is a remarkable kind of admission and a reversal in what the former president has said in the past. The other thing that I find very interesting about these pardons that Biden has issued is that I don't know how they'll work if the Constitution itself isn't going to work. And what I mean by that is, say, someone like a Liz Cheney, you have members of Congress, right, who have been preemptively pardoned to protect them. Well, the Constitution's speech and debate clause clearly protects them from presidential retribution, right? And so if that's not enough, I'm not sure how a presidential pardon issued in the last minutes of a president's term in office is going to do it either.
All right, and you say those are different from what President Trump is wanting to do when it comes to those January 6th rioters.
Yeah, I mean, President Trump has at least reportedly said that he was going to pardon nonviolent offenders that were kind of indicted for and serving jail time for January 6th. And then he's going to direct the Justice Department to dismiss indictments for cases that are currently pending. That is a very targeted, very narrow application of the pardon power. It may not be one that someone may agree with or disagree with, but it is still very targeted. President Biden issuing a pardon that says you're pardoned for all crimes going back to 2014. It's pretty sweeping.
All right. A lot to sort through, Dr. Wallner. So thankful you're able to come, help decipher some of this for us. Appreciate your time.